says here. But we want, I think about an hour will be plenty to just...
That's what I figured, we're going to be about an hour max.
Yeah. So one first thing I have to ask is who, so I know Roland was at the talk, who else was at the actual talk?
I was not at the chat.
You wasn't there?
I think I was the only one.
I wasn't
You...
either.
I'm not the
Yeah,
only
right.
one at the talk, but from this group.
Yeah, Daniel was a little bit stuck down in Australia, so he couldn't have been there.
Japan. Not in Australia, I'm in Japan.
Oh, right. Sorry, he is from Australia but lives in Japan now. That makes more sense. Yeah, so yeah.
Rewriting PM to no.
What? I'm getting okay. Now the Hangout page actually started to show the same video feed. So
Now I see also in the top right hand corner a button or a notice saying live.
yeah, we're live now. So since Roland was pretty much the only one at the talk, the reason why we're having this Hangout is because while I talked a lot about JavaScript and kind of getting into JavaScript and trying to get out of the anxiety and worries about getting there, I didn't really show any examples, so we will be doing that, and I will give a little introduction into how I started getting more into Angular especially, and how that led to working on JavaScript for me. I will actually, let me try to, because I should be able to share my screen too. Let's see. Screen share. There we go. Okay, I can even select the window. That's great. So let's go with this one. That should actually be. I will move you guys over to the other screen.
That's great about having multiple monitors.
Yeah, right.
We can use the screen space. David is gone.
Yeah, he's gone.
I don't know what he wanted to show, but maybe he got embarrassed.
So that worked out great.
Oh, there he is again. We were discussing whether what you wanted to show us was too embarrassing.
It probably was, yeah. Let me, because I switched it on to sharing the window. Let me try to share my desktop. Maybe that's work. Oh, wait a sec. I have to actually do this. Now, I did this before, and last time it also had the same problem because I had to select it via keyboard command. You should be seeing...
Yes, now I see your browser.
That's better. That's a lot better. So, but let's actually start with this one.
Is Mangrove based on AngularJS or not?
Yeah, the client application is based on that.
Okay.
But the first thing I actually wrote in Angular, is that a good screen size for you? Because I don't want to make it too big.
I think it's perfect.
Okay, sweet. So, as I said in the talk, what you really want to do is have some kind of project that doesn't really have to do with anything of your business, because that usually would mean that you get all the kind of anxieties and problems that are attached to the business, but now on a factor of 10, because you now try to introduce a new technology in there. So what I did was I built a kind of simple application that connects to YouTube, to the API, and downloads the videos in your subscription feed. And we actually log in here.
I think it's actually a very good tip that you just pushed in there, that don't try to do new technology on a customer project.
Right. Because that is just
Here's
asking for
spirit of
trouble.
adventure.
What?
Sorry, Daniel?
Where is your spirit of adventure?
Right. Why not just constantly fail hilariously big and never really get anything done?
Well, him saying it doesn't mean that I don't do it.
Right. So as you can see, this is very simple feed, and what it does is just it takes it connects to the YouTube API, posts on videos, and within the Angular application it builds this kind of subscription grid as it used to be. And in a way, I was just trying to get back to getting back the old YouTube subscription window, which I was with I thought was pretty neat. So, and then I just added some features so you can mark videos as watched, or you can delete them and put them in a bin somewhere. So in a way, it was mostly about I watch a lot of YouTube to procrastinate, and I wanted to have a more structured way of going about it, and so I built this one. I can also show you the code. Let me try to switch over to the different window without hopefully breaking anything this time. So screen share. This should be it. There we go. Whoa, that's small. So the good thing when comparing this to the kind of PHP apps that we're used to building is that you have complete separation of the display logic and what happens on the server. In this case, what happens on the server is just data I pull in through the API, so it's not that much. But if you, for example, let's see, the index is pretty simple, and all I'm doing in here is that I'm building a couple of diffs that are a container, and the most important thing happens right here. So in Angular there is a thing called controllers, and with a controller, that's kind of the simplest way to attach functionality to your DOM. So we have the app repeat controller, which I need to refactor because it isn't particularly fitting name. But I can just take this one, and within the code, I also have, so the root variable is called sanity app, and it's the controller app repeat controller. This stuff up top here is just injecting different services. So I'm inserting, for example, the Google API service, and later on I'm querying that to log in. And in the let's show you the videos. Check this one, right? So the HTML is a little bit broken up, but you should make out what's happening here. So in here, this is the most important part. We have an ng repeat, which means I will give you a set of data, and I want you to do something with it for every single item. And so in this case, I'm loading the data set of videos. So we have videos in here, and we also have within the controller a scope, which is everything that is particular to this one controller, .videos. So if we assign that to this variable, it will then show up in here as this. And then what I'm doing, that's a little bit more complicated. I'm using a that's called a directive, which is kind of like creating your own HTML elements. So I could, I think, also do something like video. So that would then be a new directive. But in this context here, this is the directive video item, and I'm doing stuff like pulling in a template, which is this item here, and so you see the thumbnail being loaded in. And in here I have access to the scope variable, which is video dot and I have, for example, the thumbnail, medium, and that's all I need to do to create a link to the image that you saw in the list earlier. So in a way, what you're doing with, or what you can do with Angular is you're porting most of what you do in the view and controller part of the MVC stack, for example in Joomla, right into Angular. So you really only need to get out the data and maybe do verification, validation on the when you post in data, and everything else can completely happen within this one Angular application that you've built. Let's see. So oh no, I don't think I used that in there. There is another thing that also does routing, for example, which I don't need in this application, but I will show you that from Mangrove. And yeah, that's another stuff. So one thing that I really like about Angular that I want to show you is this bit right at the top here. And that's actually something that I've used for my own PHP code, which is why I said in the talk that it has actually helped me write better PHP code. What it does up here is you create your module, which is this one here, the Sanity app, and you give it a name, and then you can load in different modules that you have loaded before. So kind of like the include or the native Joomla stuff, the jimport. So that's kind of what you're doing here, but on a little bit deeper level. So all you see below this, the config, the run, and when I create controllers and directives, that is a module, and within these here, these are just the same module. So I have, for example, a bootstrap module that provides certain directives that you then can reuse in your HTML. I'm using a local storage plugin that I can use to store data in the local storage of the browser. And I'm currently switching to a different local storage, which helps me use WebSQL natively there. But with these few lines, you basically just import the functionality at the start of your application, and then you have it as, for example, like here, the Google API provider. And there is a different structure. There are services, providers, and factories, and they kind of all do a similar thing. The basic idea is that usually you work with directives and controllers, which are directly connected to what the user sees in the interface. But within these, you want to have certain reusable services or providers that give you, for example, like here, the Google API. And then, let's see what I'm actually doing with this. I can then do something like Google API.authorize whenever I'm doing scope.connect. And if you now go to the start page, I have a button in here that has ng click connect. And because I put the connect function into the scope of the controller, I can call it up with this simple command. And everything after that, so the Google authorizer then pipe through to here.
So the everything is called ng something?
Yeah, that's the native. So these are all directives. A directive is a custom extension of the usual DOM stuff. So you have class, for example, is a native attribute to this HTML element. And with a directive, you can create a new one. And all the native Angular ones are called a namespace ng dash. But you could also
like Angular, like what? Ng like what?
Oh yeah, ng is just the abbreviation for Angular. So it's just
okay.
Angular that way.
Oh, you can write both.
No, you can't actually write both. Actually, it's a shorthand for data-ng. So you know that you can. There's kind of a compatibility layer that you can do everything with data-. But in this, you can also use this one.
Okay. Another question: when you instantiate your application, you said you have these what did you call them? The bootstrap, the modules, yeah.
Right.
After you instantiate them, or I mean, use them in your instantiation, you have to declare each one of them. Or some of them are native to Angular.
You mean declare in, for example, the controller? Oh,
sorry, if you can go all the way back to the top.
right. Yep.
You have the ng-animated bootstrap, the local storage,
Mm-hmm.
and the local forage module. And if
Right.
I go to line 11, you have there the $local storage.
So this is a little bit more complicated. Within the local storage module, there is something called a there's something called a provider, which is called local forage, and I can call it in by this is the config stage. Within the config stage, the only thing you can do is call in providers. So we call in the local storage provider. Further down, for example, let me actually show you the Google API. That's probably the simplest thing. So I have my controller here. I want to use the Google API. And so this gives me certain functionality, but I want to actually see where I define it. So let me switch down. So I have here the declare a new provider, which I call Google API. And within this provider, I now create the connect function, which I have used further up. And in here is the actual call to the Google API that I'm doing. So I'm kind of repackaging the Google API as a provider within my application. And what this is all about is kind of trying to keep things separate in scope. So I could use straight up just the Google API.auth because it is a global variable, but I want to have it encapsulated within an actual provider in there. Another thing would, for example, be the YouTube application that I have in here. This does stuff like compare the version number so people know when something is updated. There should also be one where I connect to, the YT data, for example. This is where I query the YouTube API to actually get videos. So in here I can say I want to make a get request to a certain type. And if I want to have all the subscriptions, I get all the subscription with certain options. And I could use all this code and just port it over to my controller, but I want to have it encapsulated within a service. So this is why I put it here.
Okay, I guess having it the way you have it now, it's better maintainable also.
Yeah, and this is because the Mozilla group, which does local forage, they have a library, and that is now packaged within an Angular module. So that makes it possible for me to just include it with this one line up here, and I don't have to put it all in my own code. And this makes it very, very simple to reuse code from other people. Angular also does the same thing. For example, they started, I think, about half a year or a year ago to take code that was in the core Angular code base and factor that out into modules. So, for example, if you want to use animations, you have to now include the ng-animate module, and you have to actually also load it. Where do we have it? Somewhere in here. Should be, I think, here. Right here.
Okay. Can I ask you something?
Sure.
So you are declaring the libraries you want to use. You are declaring them explicitly, no? At the end of the file. There is no any inline method to load them automatically, no?
Right. So there is nothing like. Sorry.
For example, there is no any automatic method to load Bootstrap or the Google APIs, no?
Exactly. You have to define them before the application starts. So you create the module, and once the module is created, you basically there might be a way to load them in later on, but I think it's completely fixed from that point on. This is also why there is this config stage, for example. This is what happens before you actually run your application, which happens down here. So there is a way to configure your application before it starts, but once it's started, it is fixed in that state.
I think it's because JavaScript can't access, or well, it can, but most of the time it won't be able to access the file system. So auto-loading is sort of out of the question.
Well, there is require.js, which you can also use, which helps you just load the stuff that you need to load. you might be able to bridge those two, but I haven't looked into that yet. I must say that I kind of like defining your application and already knowing what the scope is. That also makes it simpler to package your JavaScript into one file, for example, because you already know this is all the JavaScript I will ever need. And sure, you could look into whether you load JavaScript after that and push it in there, but usually you know in advance what you want to get to, so that's basically that.
Just one more question. You have in the instantiation the UI.bootstrap. Can you show where the bootstrap is actually
sure. Let me see. So I use it. I will show you the interface next, but let me show you how I call that up. It should be in the footer, I think, because I have the button there to show that you can.
Yeah, it's the button primary.
Yeah, but it's not there. Hang on. I think I'm calling just the. Well, let me see. There should be something called settings. A little bit settings. So here I have the click event for open, and I'm in the controller settings modal controller, which you can probably already guess maps to a modal, a bootstrap modal. So in here I have a modal provider, and this is the thing that I'm importing from UI.bootstrap. So the modal provider has the option to open a new modal, and within here I can define that I want to have a certain HTML that I call up, and these are the application settings basically.
Yeah.
So when I now go to, hang on, switch to.
It's kind of strange not to see any PHP file in there.
Right. So this is the button down here. When you click that, that then opens a new settings page. And the nice thing about this is that when you click the button, it only then loads the HTML. So that's basically a separate loading event, which also has reduced the loading time. I will show you the router in the Mangrove server next, so where you can also do basic routing, which does the same. But in here, that has now queried the server for a new HTML file, which is then presented in here, and you have certain options that you can click through. Yeah, I think that's about it for this application. I will show Mangrove next, but if you have questions, let me know.
I have one question about PHP Storm, how you use it. You have a list of files or something right in the middle on the left-hand side of your work area.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Yeah, I think you can actually. I think you can do it in view.
Like recently used files or something?
These are what usually would be the tabs. So I just have the tabs on the left side. You would have them on the top side otherwise. Yeah.
I thought it was like a favorite list or something.
There is something like that in PHP Storm as well. Well, I'm not using that, but in here, I just have a wide screen. I don't really. I also often have a lot of files open. So in that case, it kind of.
Because I have the tabs at the top at the moment, because that's the standard in PHP Storm. But if I think you open more than 8 tabs or so, it closes the earliest open tab.
Do you pin them? You can pin the files that you don't want to close, never to be closed.
Right.
Yeah. The problem is I sit in different views all the time, and there's so many files that I know that there's the Control-E to get you the list of the most recently used files.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get them back, but it would be nice if they're still open.
Right. There's also what I really like is close unmodified, which I often use to just close everything that I haven't really worked on.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is where you change the placement of the tabs.
Okay, yeah.
This is what I use to put them on the left side. Yeah.
Let's see, you have more or different options than I have. You have to open on GitHub, and
that's probably some kind of plugin.
Okay.
It should be
Yeah,
some kind of.
there's more because I see PHP stats. I don't have that, so it's all a matter of configuration, I guess.
Right, right. I also have, this is also something that I thought about mentioning in the talk, but I also have a very complicated coloring scheme, which you kind of see here. It's actually more noticeable in PHP. Let me actually, because we will switch to the other thing soon, let me load up Mangrove Server. There we go. Also make that a little smaller. Because I really like a noisy color scheme for my code highlighting, because it helps me keep the code simple. Because if you make the code too complicated, that ends up just
Too much of a carnival.
Right. You just colors always in your face, so you that kind of forces you to
write less code or better code.
Right. Actually, well, it does for me. So. Let me close unmodified. So, for example, what's a good example? User service. Well, kind of. Or the hook, for example, that's a good one. Close that as well. Should be okay from the screen size. Yeah, so I have quite colorful code, and that helps me keep it simple. Otherwise, it would just be a complete mess. And I also do stuff like always stay below 80 characters each line.
I try to, but it doesn't always work.
Well, that's the thing. I think Raphael had a pretty good point about that in his talk, where he said that you kind of, once you force yourself to always go that way, only after you have used it for a certain while does it become apparent why that's actually helpful. And another service that I also discussed with him, which he already knew, is I think I mentioned it in the talk, is Scrutinizer, which goes through your code and looks at how complex your functions and your ifs are, and that tells you basically you should work on this one function because it's too hard to understand.
Yeah,
I think this one, for example, has a bad rating.
Problems in the template files where I mix HTML and PHP.
Yeah.
What happened was, it's actually a real life example. In one of my extensions, I broke down the form declaration where you say form, name is, ID is, and type is, and I put every item of that form definition on its own line, and it broke the form.
Okay.
Because the spaces were no longer there, so it put all the stuff together. And I only wrote it, of course, after I deployed the application.
Mm-hmm.
And people were telling me it doesn't work.
Okay. That's not good.
No.
I'll have to close a couple.
Can you try to see if you have a command that we only see your screen, your screen share, because it's switching when somebody's talking, and it's easier to follow if it's always the screen which is on the video.
Yeah, I actually.
Yeah.
I think you can do that if you click my name. So there is this one icon for me.
I tried, but it did not work. But okay, chat.
In the video window, there are these icons for the people who are participating.
Yeah.
And if you click one of them, it should get a blue outline, and that fixes it to just that one. Or at least it should. It does for me, at least.
Can you talk, Valerie?
Okay, it doesn't matter. It's okay.
It works for me. If I click on Valen's name and you talk, Valerie, I no longer see your icon pop up.
Okay, I clicked on it. We'll see if it works. Okay,
does it work?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, it works. Actually. Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Knows all.
So let me show you the actual thing that the business thing that I've then worked on. So this is Mangrove, and so this is a standalone application, but it will also work pretty much the same within Joomla. And this is where it also gets interesting for Daniel, because he's looking into that. Actually, Daniel was talking to me earlier and was asking me all those questions about how I build mangroves, so I pushed him to just join the Hangout because I would be explaining it here anyways. So in here, what I'm doing, I was creating the application later, but for now you can just see the interface. So these are lists that I call up from the server where I can manipulate items. I can see linked lists, which are these packages in here. And if I, for example, I'm now going to the inspector. So this should, yeah, this works, okay. So you will see now, right here in the bottom, what the communication with the server is. So if I click on streams, for example, it actually loads up the stream HTML, the HTML files that it needs for this page, and then it also does a query to the server to get a list of streams in here. And this actually helps because what it does, it queries JSON data from the server, basically. So in that case, all the communication that actually produces data is completely JSON-based, and you don't have to push any HTML at all out of your PHP code. This also means that the reaction time is pretty fast, as you see here. Loading, I mean, it's a small list, but it still takes just like 20 milliseconds to produce it. If I switch to the packages view, it then queries additional data sets, and these are sometimes a little bit larger, which takes a little bit more time, but it's still pretty fast. And you also see I have switched to a different thing in here, but it didn't need to reload the streams because it has all those streams in the local storage for the browser.
So if you only query JSON, how do you determine the markup of the page?
Well, that is completely free for me to interpret. So for example, in this window here, I get the streams list, and I show it as this list up here. If I go to the package view,
has to come from somewhere.
Excuse me?
The markup has to come from a file somewhere, right?
Right. So in this case, where did you see that? This is the streams list. Right here, is it this one? No, that's the hook. Well, up here, for example, it did this through this one, stream HTML, and it got back this one HTML snippet, which is in the stream.html file. I think it loaded the other one from memory or something. But it should have shown that. That's weird. Anyways, this is how it loads the template. And in this template, for example, for the packages, I'm using the same data set, the JSON data set, to produce the list of streams. And within that list, I'm loading a different list, which then pulls up the packages. So that's where the difference is. And so this is an actual decoupling of the data and the presentation. And in most MVC systems, for example, it's still reasonably coupled because you need some kind of information of how the data will be presented. But in here, you just push out the data and then use it on the client side. This also, so I showed you, let me see. The packages, for example, I get them for a certain URL. So it's /hotbox/streams/87 /package. And this is the call to the server, which then, let me switch to the editor. Hang on. Server. So in here, we now actually have, where is it? Well, we don't really have it because it's kind of inspired by Angular, so there are providers and services in here as well. And I have a service defined for stream. And what you see here is all the PHP code I need to have a complete REST access point. So getting data, deleting and posting updates to data is done through calling up a stream service, which means it's based on a REST service, which provides these basic data types. And anything, so that's basically it. If there are more complex things, like for example the user service, which I have here, and this actually has an implementation. So this extends the REST service, which I have up here.
Now, Red Bean is the REST service, or just Red Bean has a REST service?
Red Bean is actually the database. It's an ORM library, and I'm working with the guy who built Red Bean, and I've extended it a little bit to have a more usable REST interface. And I have, let me pull up a different project. So this is the, that's too large for this. Hang on. We'll resize this and switch over. So the underlying stack is called saltwater, and in here I have, like I showed you earlier with the with Angular modules, I have a Red Bean module, and in here I have a REST service, and this can accept calls. And then, for example, it creates a path from that call and it hands that over to the REST handler in here. And the actual database stuff happens in here. So probably nobody has used Red Bean yet, but it's a pretty neat library to make very simple calls. So I mean, I have this REST access point, but I can also show you. You have seen that in the where's the window? Command of server window. I have this one here. I'm getting a user object, and no, down here. To delete a user, I am using a provider for that. So this is wait, here. This gets from my database layer one user with the username this one, or one user with the ID. And then what I'm doing here is I'm storing the password, and then okay, I have the old version here. But what you usually would do is you have your database. I haven't loaded in here. Oh yeah, this is also dependency injection. So I can just use the database provider that you saw in the saltwater module. And down here I can say db store user. And that's all I need to create a new user account and hash the password. And it's done, basically.
Just a question. Before password, you have a backslash. That is something I've not seen before. Is that?
Oh, that's PHP 5.3 stuff. I think I can actually delete it. Yeah. That's namespacing. So you could have...
of course.
Right.
Namespacing having more than just one word.
Right. And for root functions, you can use this one, but I think you could actually also just do it this way. You see it up here where it's saltwater /
yeah,
bean.
there I understood it. Before password, you just
right.
registered.
Right. You're right. And so delete user, for example, I get the user. I also kill the sessions for that user, which I can do here, and then I trash the user, which is a delete action. And since I'm extending the REST service, the delete user function would usually be provided by the REST service, and it would actually just carry out this line. But I want to attach extra functionality, so I'm using this one.
And the $DB, that is your own database class, right? Not JDatabase.
Right, and this is again interesting for Daniel. So the reason why I have built this stack is with the express purpose because I want to deploy it within Joomla. So right now what I have is I have a provider, this one, and this gives me a user. But if I'm in Joomla, for example, I would want to have the Joomla user because I want to act on Joomla data. And in that case, all I have to do is create a new module, just like the Angular module you see before, create a new provider that wraps around the Joomla user. And I can then, from a user service, instead of calling the the standalone user provider that I have, I call in the Joomla user provider. And because I would configure the provider in the same way, so that it would have the same methods here, for example, that it would be a database object that I can use or that I can act on, I wouldn't have to change my code in here at all. I would just call in a different provider, and that would then give me the user from Joomla. Or I could port it to WordPress and get a user from WordPress, for example.
Interesting stuff. And we have definitely a sense of humor to have red beans lying around in salt water.
Right. Well, the salt water was actually more about mangroves, because mangroves grow in salt water.
Correct.
But then the guy who, Gabor, who builds red bean most of the time, he also mentioned that you can have them in salt water. So also the beans, you can have them in salt water.
And with red bean, you have DB in there.
True. Yeah, well, that's him. He is smart like that. So
that file that you are showing us, oops, too late.
Okay, no, out of the way. Yep.
Yeah, that's what's the language here?
But that's also PHP.
AngularJS language.
That is plain PHP, and just as I was showing you how I would configure
it's plain PHP. Okay, sorry.
But it's an interesting question, because just as I was showing how you can configure Angular services, Angular modules, this is kind of the same concept.
It was another question, because AngularJS is actually executed on the server, correct?
No, that's completely in the browser.
Oh, completely in the browser.
Right.
Okay, because Node.js is on the server.
Exactly.
Okay, but AngularJS is on the browser. Do you have to load libraries like you do for jQuery and things like that?
Yeah. I'm in here. So for this, for example, I'm loading. I could also put them in one file, but I'm not.
Okay, Ajax, Google API, AngularJS. Okay.
Right. So you load jQuery because Angular uses jQuery. If you want to, you can also do it without, but I use jQuery in 2 instances, so you do that. And then what you see is I'm including different libraries. So this is the ng storage library. And there are 2 in here. This one I have adopted for my purposes, which is a two-way binding library. This one is the one that binds from the user interface to the server, which I should actually show you. Hang on a second. So let me switch out. I will try to show just this screen. No, that's the wrong one. I will move out to the other screen. Right, and that should work. So let's try the desktop one. I hope that works. Woo! Infinite repeat. Space. So in here, for example, I will now load a completely new window. Is it still large enough that you can kind of make out what's happening?
Yes, for me it is.
Okay, cool. So I will now, this is a completely separate session. And I will log in here. So I'm going to streams here, to the streams here. And if I create a new source for data in here, it connects to the server, and you see it pop out on the other side as well. So what's happening here is I have loaded the list, and everything after that is just loading updates. So if I then go in here, for example, and delete it on this side, it also disappears on the other side.
So there's something polling the server the whole time to check?
Exactly. Because I wanted to deploy it in Joomla, I can't rely on stuff like WebSockets, but WebSockets will be the next step after this. But if I, for example, let me show you what's actually happening here. I can also open it here, just so that we can see it on the other side. So I'm adding a new source. When I press save, it posts in here, and you can see the parameters. So it is just the name new source. And on the other window, it gets this update, and in the response, you see the exact same object that we just posted over from the other side. So kind of in the same way, it is a listener service. So let's actually reload this so I can show you.
I guess you need a polling thing from the browser to the server, because the server wouldn't know where to push.
Right. No. This is what happens first. So first, I'm pushing a subscription, which tells the server I'm interested in the resource called stream.
Yeah.
Now the server knows what I want to see. So when I get updates, the server looks into the update table and collects all the updates that I haven't seen yet that have happened on the stream table. So whenever something happens, so when you, for example, would post a new stream into the system, it would post it into the database and also look up who is subscribed to streams. And
an IP address, or?
No, just for your session name. So you are identified just by your session name. And when your session then requests all the updates, the server only needs to figure out which one of the updates are linked to your stream to your session, and then it hands you those objects, and then it just kills the connection. So the object stream is one continuous database table, and the server figures out who is interested in which of those updates. And then, because the problem usually is once you start into building a JavaScript application, you don't want to reload your page anymore, and you want to, for example, if I'm editing something, I don't want anybody else to go in there and try to edit it as well, stuff like that. And so once you can do basic Ajax, like I will just post this in, but that would not help you to actually synchronize stuff with other clients. So you need a very base layer of listener, and this is called publisher subscriber, so pub/sub. So I'm publishing a new object into a resource, and somebody else is subscribed to that resource, so they get all the updates for that resource.
Yeah. Another question: we have the streams page and the packages page. The moment you click on that link, it does a query to the server and gets for a JSON string of data.
Right.
But at that moment, also send out a request for the HTML for the web page.
Yeah. Right. So in that case, it loads so it doesn't load the whole page, but just the template that is defined by that view.
Yeah, exactly. But when you go to another page and come back, is it requested again, or that is cached?
No. That stays there.
Okay.
So if you are developing, you usually would reload the page, but you could also put in some logic that would tell the client that it has to reload. But it tries to keep down the traffic as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going to.
Right.
Because looking at the polling, you see, I think it's every second or so it's asking the server if there's any info. Even though these are small requests, if you have a large user base, it becomes a lot of requests for the server.
Oh yeah, and this is why, I mean, this is right now more of an administrator application. So you would have maybe a couple dozen people at most working on it.
Yeah.
So for that, it is feasible to do this.
Oh,
for a front end thing, you would need a bigger setup, and that's why you would want to have WebSockets. On the other hand, you see, as I said before, these take just around 20 milliseconds to generate. So even the stack that produces the updates is very, very fast. So you don't have to worry that much about stressing out your server. And I mean, from traffic-wise, these are completely empty, basically. And if I reload the page, I mean, it loads the JavaScript libraries, and after that, the data set is, the data set is 80 kilobytes, no, 0.80 kilobytes.
0.8, yeah.
So it is quite small. the
Yeah,
amount
exactly.
of
But as you said, it depends on use base. With about a dozen of people, the server's not going to break a sweat. But
right.
if we become as popular as Facebook,
right. Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan, as you see from using JavaScript, of using the right tool for the right thing. And this is something that you need for certain applications. For a user-facing application, you wouldn't want to query every second. Say, for example, you want to have a comment application that helps people comment on an article. You don't want to query every single second whether there's a new comment there. So you could slow it down to 10 seconds, for example.
yeah,
Or you could go completely via WebSockets, which is also an option. And there are actually services now that help you push out WebSocket updates, which is also quite nice, which also helps reduce your server load. But yeah, as I said, the right tool for the right thing, basically.
Yeah, what I like about this is if I compare it to my own extension, in the next version I'm working on, I have been pulling a lot of logic of my extension out of Joomla, simply because I don't need the overhead. And it has sped up things by a lot.
Yes.
And
well, in Joomla, you have all the system plugins that are loaded, for example, which is usually a problem. There are a couple of especially bad offenders which actually which poll the original developer server for new updates every time the system plugin is loaded. And they actually do database requests on that, so that's, I think, at least half a second just for one plugin to check whether it's up to date.
There are plugins that add data to your JSON strings. Very lovely too.
Well, what I will probably do, because I will finish porting that to Joomla, or what I have already started doing, is that I just communicate with Joomla or through Joomla to create a token that I can use to verify whether the user is supposed to get access.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I pipe it through a separate PHP file because I know the user is good, and at that point I can then switch them over to a direct line into my dataset where I don't need all these Joomla system updates or something like that.
No, because in my case, it's all I'm doing is inserting updates on the database, nothing more or less. And that using JavaScript for that, because otherwise you get your PHP timeouts.
Right.
But doing that within Joomla, yeah, just takes so long because, as you said, it loads the whole framework and everything surrounding it.
Right.
While all you want to do is a database insert or update.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you were saying the right tool for the right problem, whatever.
Exactly.
What is the difference between our AngularJS, Node.js, and not using AngularJS? What is the advantage of doing AngularJS and compared to not using AngularJS?
So the first difference is that Node.js runs completely on the server and Angular is completely on the client side. So Angular Node.js would be more like the Joomla framework or like a Symfony framework. So it's in itself a kind of framework to build a CMS on top of it. Angular is really just provides you the functionality that you need for a client interface. So all the controller and view stuff is handled through that. The benefit between using Angular and using pure JavaScript is that Angular, on the one hand, provides a lot of modules that you can reuse. So that's code that you don't have to write and that you don't have to maintain. There's also the aspect of making sure that it runs in every single browser, which is usually a pain. You can, if you build it on your own, you can spend as much time making sure that it works on every browser as you actually develop your application. So that's where we are lucky in PHP that it kind of works the same everywhere, but in pure JavaScript, you don't have that luxury. So you need at least something like jQuery, which helps ease out the differences between all the browsers. And AngularJS in specific, I talked a little bit about that in the talk, is that it has a very, very large and very active community. So there are pretty much modules for anything that you need. And that helps not just because it gives you functionality, but also because you can look at how other people have solved certain problems, and you don't have to work from zero all the time. I mean, that's why I chose Angular in the end. And it's also a pretty neat framework to develop in by itself, so that helps.
And there is no incompatibility between using AngularJS and Node.js at the same time?
No, they don't really care about each other. Node.js lives on the server and pushes data out, and Angular lives in the browser and takes data in.
You can use both library at the same time.
Well, Node.js is not really a library. It's more like, as I said, it's more like a Joomla that you have on the server, but not a CMS in itself, but more like the Joomla framework.
And what's the position, Joomla position about AngularJS? Are they going to use it? Sorry, I was not at the job this year.
No, but Roland actually asked the
same question. The latest gossips.
Right. No, this is kind of why I held the talk. The problem with committing that much to JavaScript usually is that, I mean, for me, it has completely redefined the way in which I work. So you can't just say, yeah, we will put a little Angular on top of it and everything else will be the same. Stuff like that you don't even need views or really don't even need controllers in the end. That kind of makes having a whole MVC stack a lot less interesting in the end. So.
Okay, great. It makes the whole Joomla to behave different.
Well, yeah. Right now, what you have is you have components which kind of expect that they have modules that load data. They pipe them through controllers and then hand them out through a view. And the view part, for example, is basically completely gone with AngularJS because it can take care of that altogether. But the problem usually is that these boundaries are not that well followed. So in Joomla, you have a lot of stuff in the controllers that should be in modules and other way around. You also have a lot of view stuff in the controllers where data is prepared before it is viewed. You have a lot of controller stuff in the views where data is kind of manipulated before it actually produces HTML output. So because these boundaries are not very well kept by the programmers, it's very hard to just say we will put Angular on top of that, load the data through. I mean, there are the JSON view, for example, in Joomla could help you just get out JSON data. But then maybe an application developer has decided to put extra logic into the HTML view, and at that point it gets a lot harder to synchronize the JSON view and the HTML view. So it is definitely possible to have the whole interface on Angular, but kind of the community aspect and the effort aspect is quite large. And this is why my tip in the talk also was developers should usually start on a project that doesn't really affect anything, so you don't have to worry about breaking anything with it. It also helps that users are very used to a certain interface, and big changes like this one, you can't just shove them in on the side. You can do stuff like loading data via Ajax, and that speeds up things a little bit, or having a live search, for example. But I started going into JavaScript about 2 years ago, and then really got into it developing applications about a year ago. So before that, I was figuring stuff out. And within that year, I think I have rewritten the plans of how I would build up my stack and how I would have kind of all these modules interact with each other at least 5 or 6 times. So it is a big commitment. And I think people stay away from JavaScript because they kind of feel that it is a big commitment, and they're kind of right to do that. But that has just, well, this is the point that I make in the talk. It has led to a point where people are not even touching JavaScript and not getting deeper into it because they are a little bit afraid of it right now.
I think you make a good point that there's no consistency in how the MVC is used. But when I talk to other developers, Well, the idea I'm getting, and also for myself, it's sometimes just unclear whether something should be put in the controller or in the view, and because because the MVC is just a theory basically, but we should actually within Joomla have a guideline when we put something in the controller, when something in the view, when something in the model. But since it's not there, I think we're stuck with this.
It's also kind of inherent to the MVC structure itself, because model view controller is it is a decision that you make about your system architecture, and everything after that happens, every exception to that rule, and the more developers you throw at the concept, the more exceptions you will get to that rule, and you also see that in the fact that there are, I think now, 5 or 6 application frameworks that sit on top of Joomla, kind of competing with each other, because I mean, in the end, for me, these are just developers who found all those exceptions in the Joomla MVC and who were kind of fed up with trying to change the core, because that's a huge process. So they built their own framework on top of Joomla, and that makes it even more complicated than to kind of find some form of consensus there, because
you probably know that George Wilson is going to rewrite the MVC in Joomla.
Happens all the time.
Well, but they want to go namespace it at least.
Well, that helps. For me personally, I mean, I've showed you that I'm not even using MVC. I'm using just very plain services and providers. So in these 5 or 6 iterations that I went through to figure out how I want to structure my code, that's the smallest core I could arrive at. So it's really just service is something that a user wants, provider is something that a service wants, or the system internally wants. Then I have a router that just figures out which service I want to get through. And then there is a thing called contexts, which is borrowed from DCI, which Herman van Perren also mentioned. So you can have services behave differently in different contexts. So I could have, for example, as I showed you, there are these streams, that's the basic data type, and then you have streams within the hotbox service, which is the service that actually makes packages.
So depending on the context.
Right, and in this case, what you can actually do is, in a different context, it could query a completely different database. Maybe you, for example, have an archive context where the articles are in a completely different database. So that, or for example, if you say, I want to, all the actual new articles, they should be HTML files. In this case, you pipe through the HTML. But these 3 things together, services, providers, and contexts, that is, I think at least, the most abstract concept that you can arrive at right now. And this is why I've built it that way. And it also helps me because that makes it simple to model code differently, or to ship code to different environments. Kind of the tagline for saltwater, the stack below that is called, well, okay, one tagline is that it is about deploying functionality in harsh environments, so out at sea basically, and a harsh environment would be Joomla, for example, or would be WordPress, where you have a lot of system load on top of stuff. But on the other hand, the other tagline is you should not necessarily drink this. So I'm specifically trying to not be a framework with this. It should be very, very simple. And the services especially, they should be almost like an example implementation. You saw, for example, let me show you this one because it's kind of interesting. So the user service, in here you see, so it's the class user, so we know it's the service user, and then you have the public function post user. And what this is analogous to is post user. And down here we have the same thing, just delete user, so it's HTTP delete user. And so the routing for that is very, very simple. And you don't really have problems with figuring out what is the path to
I think
something.
very simple. Is that because /user will go and load the user provider?
What was that?
Sorry, you said the routing for delete /user is very simple.
Yeah.
And that is because /user will load the user provider?
Let me put it down again. No, actually, what I meant was that by calling the function delete user, this is this up here. So if there is, I have a router in here, and the router takes the HTTP name, so the type, which is get, post, or delete, and the path. So in this case, the path would be /user. So it knows it needs the user service, and it wants to have delete something. And in this case, because it has, you could also make special stuff like, what could you say?
Okay, so it takes the delete command and it adds the class name to it to get the function name.
Right, so from the HTTP method and from the path that you call to, it can figure out which service I want and which function I want to call within the service.
That's great.
Okay, and it does that on the fly because it's not hard-coded, I assume.
Exactly. And also you can have stuff like, as I said, you can have different contexts within here. So I have the Hotbox application which makes packages where I would have completely different sets of data and completely different commands that I can call. But this is, for example, you could also, from the Angular application, call a certain method on this one service. But usually what I try to stick to are these very basic HTTP commands, because that makes everything very, very fast.
Yeah, it looks interesting. I might need to write a RESTful service soon for somebody.
One thing that I will actually do, this is also something that I talked to Daniel about, is that I'm not sure whether you're familiar with To-Do MVC.
No.
It's very interesting. So it's one application, a To-Do application that they have ported to different frameworks. For Angular, for example, for Ember.js.
Oh, no, I have heard about it.
Yeah, and what I will do is to take that code and implement it kind of as a mangrove saltwater application. So you would see kind of how you would implement this standard application into this stack.
Yeah.
But you're right. This is really about APIs basically, and since I have decided to have most of the user interface in an application. In an Angular application, this also means I just need to query the API. It also means, I mean, I haven't talked about Mangrove yet, I just figured it out. So, let me switch to this one. Well, it's also interesting. The good thing about this is I have now the client application here that I can switch around in, but I can also query that from a different application. And in this case, so Mangrove in itself is an app store, basically. It provides software in a dedicated channel to clients, and it's specifically built first for businesses. So it's kind of like Composer, but actually for applications. So you don't have Composer is pretty good for libraries, but in my main application AEC, for example, I want to ship 90 payment processor plugins. And I don't want to have one repository for each one of these. So what Hotbox does is it breaks apart your entire Git repository into different packages that are then separately updated and separately shipped to the client where it's configured. And on top, so this is the server part where I produce the output, and then within Joomla I have a client that connects to the server. And that API is precisely the same API that I use in my AngularJS interface. So I don't really have to do anything else than make sure for example, here I have the applications that I'm working on, and this would be the AEC membership manager. And within this one, I can define which root package is called. And then you can, on the client side, configure how you actually want to extend that one application. So there's a logic in there which tells you which other libraries should be called if you want to, for example, have a PayPal plugin within the membership application. And on top of that, even, the idea is that this will be a decentralized app store. So if you're a site developer, for example, as many people have figured out right now, especially by using stuff like the WordPress automatic updater, that has already broken a lot of sites where people have made modifications. So my approach is that site builders would actually roll their completely own server with this. And they can actually do that by just installing the same stack within Joomla. And instead of having their own clients connect to my server, they would have a connection to me and hand that over to their own clients. So they would become kind of the person at the door making sure that no bad update gets through. And that will, I think, help keep down a lot of problems like, oh, you have pushed a new update, one bug is fixed and another one is introduced, and now I have a problem on my live server, which is kind of common.
Yeah, then the clients, they all register with your server, so the server knows where to send the customer.
Right, and well, in this case, their own clients would only be registered to them, so I don't even have to know about their clients. So this is not a central service. There are a couple of these in Joomla right now that have one central server where kind of every site has to be registered. And I think there's also a problem in terms of security. But in my implementation, if you have a couple of clients, say you have 50, 60 clients, and you don't want that data to be shared with me as David, the guy who built Mangrove server. So you have them on your own server, you get my push updates, and you provide them to your own clients.
What are you pushing then? I mean, in terms of packages?
You're not even really, well, it depends on how you want to implement it, but right now what you're pushing is just lists. So you would push a list of you could download these applications or these packages, and when the client requests a package, for example, at that stage you send a request to the server which collects a number of packages into one big package, sends them to you, and then you install them separately on your side. So the application is broken down into separate steps. You, on the client side, you make a decision which of those things you want to install. You send a package request to the server. It gives you a package with those things that you want to install, and then goes through them. So that's the basic idea.
Yeah, I'm still trying to process it. I'm just thinking, because you said you have ASC with 90 payment providers.
Right.
I have a payment system for the Dutch market, which supports 23 components. So
right.
Let's say I make use of the Mangrove client, then I send a list of my component with the extensions to your server, and then people who are on your site or so, they can see that list, or?
Usually it would happen in the client. So you would give, if you were to use the system, you would give your user the Mangrove client. You would tell him, connect to my server. And through that connection, he wouldn't even have to be connected to me. He could just be connected to you.
Yeah.
And in that case, for example, if you say, I have clients who don't even want to touch updates at all, you can just pipe through your own. You could pipe through the Mangrove client to them if you wanted to give them the updates for the client. But the idea is they only see the stuff you provide. And if they would want to get stuff from me, they would have to put in my server URL and pull updates from me. But it is more focused on site builders who have their own channel where they combine different streams from different providers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Because then their customers would connect to the site builder to see all the different packages that are available.
Right.
And then through them, they will go to you because you know where the main package is.
Exactly. And depending mean, you can manage that depending on what business relationship you have with your client. So, for example, you might not want to have them actually store software. You just want to have them pipe that through. So you could say, if the client connects to them, wants an update for Mangrove, for example, he then calls up my server and then is piped through to the client in the end. Or you could say they will actually become a complete copy, a synced node, where my software is synced to them, and then they can deploy to their own clients. But that depends on what kind of contracts you make with the site builder.
Yeah, of course. I'm just trying to get the concept. Because at the moment I'm just using the Joomla update system where you have a stream that connects to my own server.
Right. One thing that I actually want to add this month is that you could, within the Mangrove server, add a JUpdater service as an access point for a JUpdater service as a stream. Yeah. So you could pretty much convert a JUpdater stream that people would still have to ping into a push-based service where you now tell your clients that there is a new update.
Because what I'm getting is, or understanding is that Mangrove is not really for me as an extension builder to have customers update my extension, but more for site builders who can offer a range of extensions to their client.
Right. And well, the good thing about this is, I think at least, that Mangrove actually, right now, you're just giving out packages to your client, basically. Even with the JUpdater service, you give packages and then they are at your client. And Mangrove actually sets up an active connection between those nodes. So you are the software provider, you make software, then there are site builders, and then there are clients where the software is actually installed. So the site builders have an interest in you providing the software. So there is a business interest there where you can make a service agreement with them. So they would, for example, pay you an amount each year to make sure that they get the latest updates. Or you would have an agreement with them that you, for example, say, I will fix every new bug that comes up within 24 hours.
Yeah,
so that's a service that you provide for them, and they can then reacquire that cost from their own clients. But you are absolutely right. It is focused first on site builders, but I think software developers benefit a lot from that.
Yeah, because now site developers can see a list of updates on their own system rather than having to go into every website.
And you can, by pushing out updates, it also makes it a lot simpler than going into every site and updating them, even if it just means logging in, basically.
So it's basically what Watchfully and stuff are doing, right?
Except that it's not centralized.
Exactly, yeah, of course, because that's the whole idea why you started Mangrove.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm done questioning you for now.
Cool. Yeah, we're running overtime. I'm also getting some feedback from you. Somebody's making feedback. Anyway.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
You're also there.
Thank you, David.
All right. If there are any more questions, I'm up on Google Plus and on Skype, so you can just mail me if you want to. We can also collect stuff and do.
More questions, they will come when we start programming, and then we don't know where to start and how to continue and things like that.
We'll push the help button to David.
Yeah, right. No, but there are a couple of things that I will want to get out this month. So Mangrove will be released this month if all the stars align correctly. And then I will also make sure that the software stack is a little easier to understand through stuff like To Do MVC, the implementation of that. So within the course of the month, there will probably maybe be a chance to do another one of these and talk more.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for inviting me. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.